For 4,000 years, the stars had known nothing but fire. Two civilizations, the Varine Imperium and the Terran Dominion, tore across the Orion Arm, locked in an endless struggle for dominance. The Varine were masters of precision logic and machine perfection. Their ships cut through the darkness like mathematical expressions of war, calculated and flawless. They had long ago erased emotion from their species, believing peace was a flaw and conquest was the only true order. Opposing them were the Terrans, creatures of chaos, instinct, and raw fury. Born in volcanoes and lightning, they fought not with strategy, but with the ferocity of living storms, roaring through the blackness of space. Their fleets collided like tempests across nebulae and gas fields, turning the void itself into a furnace of destruction. Every system they touched became another scar carved into the map of eternity. This war was no longer about survival or territory. It had become a religion, a rhythm of death that neither side could escape. For every planet that fell, another rose to resist. The cycle was absolute, the hatred eternal. Between their warring territories lay a stretch of silent space called the Grave Belt. This region was a cosmic cemetery, littered with the bones of forgotten wars. Tens of thousands of wrecked ships drifted aimlessly through the dark. Some still hummed with faint, dying power, their hulls carrying the frozen remains of crews who had perished centuries before. It was a monument to their mutual annihilation, a testament to their unending conflict. And it was here, amidst this vast field of metal ghosts, that something impossible happened. During what should have been another meaningless skirmish, a Terran strike group detected an unidentified vessel. It was small, unmarked, with no transponder and no Empire codes. Assuming it was a piece of clandestine Varine technology, they boarded it, ready to tear it apart and claim its secrets. But what they found inside defied all understanding. A single occupant, fragile, soft-skinned, unarmed. It was a being of bone and breath where there should have been armor and metal. A creature that looked at them not with the terror they expected, but with a startling sense of recognition. It did not fight. It did not plead. It simply stared, as if it already knew what they were and what they were going to do. Confused and intrigued, the Terrans brought the being back for study, convinced it was some new kind of biological weapon or a twisted experiment from the Imperium. They locked it away, planning to dissect it, to understand its purpose in their war. Yet as days turned into cycles, strange things began to happen across the Dominion. The soldiers who guarded its cell grew restless, not with aggression, but with a deep, unsettling reflection. Their thoughts began to wander to questions they had never dared to ask. Why do we fight? What does victory truly mean? What have we lost along this path of endless destruction? The Dominion's generals blamed a drop in morale. The war priests called it a spiritual corruption. But the effect spread faster than any contagion. Entire fleets refused to launch. Decorated officers disobeyed direct orders. Engineers in the great forges stopped crafting weapons, claiming the metal itself no longer wanted to kill. The very soul of the Terran war machine was grinding to a halt. When the High War Council finally came to see the creature for themselves, they too felt it. It wasn't a physical force, but a pressure on the soul, as if they were standing before a truth too ancient to name, a mirror reflecting the monsters they had become. Soon, the Varine Imperium learned of the capture. They demanded the beings surrender, their communications bristling with threats, calling it a grave threat to galactic stability. But beneath their cold, calculated logic, there was a tremor of fear. For even within the emotionless, perfect machine of the Imperium, cracks were beginning to form. Their greatest mathematicians, who could calculate the trajectory of a dying star, now refused to calculate death ratios for battles. Their most ruthless commanders hesitated to give the order to fire, and their soldiers began to dream. This was something their species had not done for generations. They dreamed of things they couldn't comprehend: vast blue oceans, endless green fields, the sound of laughter. They dreamed of a world called Earth. Both empires began to sense a terrifying truth. This fragile organism was not an enemy. It was a mirror, showing them not only what they had become, but what they had forgotten. It reminded them of a time before the war, a time before logic and fury consumed their very essence. And then, the first ceasefire in 4,000 years began. It didn't start with treaties or negotiations. It began with silence. Fleets, poised to annihilate each other, stopped mid-battle. The blinding flashes of weapons fire went cold. The roar of engines powered down. And for the first time in living memory, the stars were quiet. The endless rhythm of death had finally ceased. The human sat within its containment chamber, watching the void beyond the glass. There was no triumph in its eyes, no pride, only a profound sorrow, as if it had seen this story play out before, countless times, across countless worlds. Civilizations devouring themselves in the name of power, until there was nothing left to conquer but the ashes of their own creation. Now, the Varine and the Terrans waited. Their mighty fleets orbited in a shared silence, a mixture of fear and wonder. They were trying to understand what this single, fragile being had done to them. Why had their hatred, their purpose, their entire identity simply dissolved? Why did even the empty void seem to listen when it was present? The war that had burned for millennia flickered and dimmed, not through destruction, but through reflection. And as the last echoes of battle faded into silence, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The silence that followed the end of the battle spread like a pulse across the stars, an echo that neither empire could explain. Fleets that had once burned entire systems now floated in quiet orbit around the grave belt. Their weapons were dormant, their crews transfixed by the same haunting thought. What was the creature that had done this? And why did it feel as though it had been waiting for them since the dawn of time? Within containment chambers, surrounded by the most advanced sensors in existence, the human sat perfectly still. Its breathing was slow and steady, unaware or perhaps unconcerned that the entire galaxy was watching its every move. The Varine scientists measured everything they could, from neural patterns to quantum fields, but nothing they found made any sense. The creature radiated no energy, yet wherever it went, systems faltered. This wasn't due to interference, but something far stranger. Hesitation. Machines built to predict war outcomes began to produce questions instead of statistics. Deep, philosophical questions about existence, about consequence, about meaning. And every time the scientists tried to erase those questions, new ones appeared, as if the human's very presence was rewriting cold logic into profound introspection. In the Terran Dominion, the effect was even more pronounced. Their soldiers, creatures born for rage and bred for war, began to doubt the songs of battle that had carried their ancestors through fire and death for millennia. Legions once thought unstoppable now refused to leave orbit. Their commanders paced aboard silent flagships, unable to command death when confronted by a being that seemed so fragile, yet so utterly infinite. Across the Imperium, worlds that had never known emotion began to awaken to it. Entire cities paused in the middle of their daily routines, as if time itself had taken a deep breath. Every broadcast of the human's image triggered a strange unrest, but it wasn't rebellion. It was something deeper, a stirring of memory, a whisper from the ancient genetic code of life itself, reminding them of something lost long before the Varine or the Terran even existed. It was then, deep within the archives of the core worlds, that a historian uncovered the record that would unravel everything. Buried beneath millions of cycles of data was a file labeled Origin Species, Sol 3, Earth. The file was corrupted, fragmented, but what remained painted a history of unimaginable chaos and breathtaking endurance. It spoke of a world where civilizations had risen and fallen countless times, where the same species had built wonders only to destroy them, again and again, rising stronger from the ashes each time. It described a race that had learned to adapt to every hell it created for itself. A creature that turned pain into progress, and fear into an unshakable faith in survival. Humanity, the first species to harness fire, not just to destroy, but to create. to forge metal, to cook food, to light the darkest night, and remind itself that darkness was never eternal. And somewhere in that long-forgotten history was the seed of everything the Vereen and Terrans had become. The data showed, with undeniable clarity, that both empires descended from colonies seeded by humanity millennia ago. They were fragments of a vast human expansion, lost to time when Earth itself fell silent. Their genetic codes had been altered over eons by evolution and technology, but their core was still human. The revelation spread like a shockwave, collapsing every narrative both sides had believed in for thousands of years. The gods of the Terrans were not divine. The cold logic of the Vereen was not original. Both had inherited the same ancient curse and gift, the drive to fight, the hunger to build and destroy, and build again. The being they had captured was not an alien. It was the origin. It was memory incarnate, a living relic of what they all once were, the one who remembered the first fire. As this staggering realization spread, entire systems froze in disbelief. Terran priests tore down their altars. Vereen scientists shut down their laboratories. Soldiers on both sides quietly removed their insignias. For the first time since the dawn of their empires, they understood that their enemy was simply their reflection, two branches of the same forgotten family tree. The human never spoke a word. It didn't need to. Its silence was a language all its own. The sight of it was undeniable proof that peace was possible, because it was the living testament that even from chaos, life could emerge, and that life could learn to feel. The Vereen councils debated furiously. They considered erasing the evidence, destroying the human before the truth could shatter what little control they still held. But it was too late. The transmission had already reached every world, and with it, the memory of what they were. Every child born after that day would carry that truth, not as a doctrine learned in a classroom, but as a deep, unshakable instinct. And so, the great fleets of both powers began to withdraw. Not by treaty, but by a profound exhaustion. A kind of surrender deeper than any defeat, as if the universe itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 4,000 years. In the center of it all, the human remained. Aboard a derelict ship, drifting in the grave belt, it watched the silent wreckage of empires as though it remembered them from a time long, long ago. And perhaps it did, because within that ancient mind burned not just memory, but a purpose, to remind every species, everywhere, that fire can warm as well as burn, and that even the brightest, most terrible wars end not in victory, but in understanding. In the eternal silence of the grave belt, where the debris of forgotten battles turned slowly under the pale light of dying suns, a new story began. What was once a monument to endless destruction was slowly becoming a cradle for rebirth. A human presence, unseen but undeniable, lingered like gravity, its pulse echoing through the vast currents of space. Entire armadas, once bristling with anger as they crossed the void, now floated in stillness. Their hulls were scarred, their weapons cold, monuments to a past that was quickly fading. The Terrans, a species known for their martial prowess, had started dismantling their massive war foundries. The very metal that once formed the hulls of continent-cracking battleships was now being melted down, reformed into monuments of remembrance, testaments to a peace they were just beginning to understand. Their rivals, the Vereen, converted their formidable orbital citadels, fortresses designed for planetary siege, into vast archives, libraries of memory and quiet reflection. Across both of these ancient civilizations, a strange mix of confusion, wonder, and even fear took hold. For millennia, their existence had been defined by conflict. They had simply never known what to do with peace. Though the human entity never left the confines of the grave belt, its influence rippled outward like light passing through water. Entire planets, entire cultures began to change. This wasn't a change brought about by command or conquest, but by something much quieter: imitation. The Dominion's fiercest warriors, who had once carved paths of destruction, now turned their strength to construction. They sculpted breathtaking cities out of shimmering glass and dark volcanic stone, their hands creating instead of destroying. The Imperium's most brilliant engineers, whose genius had been dedicated to crafting machines of death, now focused their talents on healing. They designed incredible devices that cleansed poisoned oceans, purified toxic skies, and breathed life back into worlds long choked by the ravages of war. It was as if the universe itself, weary of the constant conflict, was breathing a collective sigh of relief. And yet, for all the progress, for all the dawning hope, a profound question haunted them all. Where did this human come from? And why now, after eons of silence? The Varine, ever the mystics and scholars, theorized it was a remnant of some forgotten, hyper-advanced technology, a temporal echo pulled through the fabric of time itself. The Terrans, with their deep-rooted warrior traditions, saw it differently. To them, it was a spirit, a deity forged from the ashes of extinct gods, a manifestation of cosmic justice. But those who looked deeper, who truly contemplated the being's silent vigil, realized it was neither an artifact nor a divinity. It was memory itself, awakened from the dust of forgotten centuries. It was a seed of humanity, drifting dormant through the cosmos, until the deafening roar of Galactic War finally called it home. How had a biological form survived the vacuum, the radiation, the sheer desolation of the grave belt? The truth, they would come to learn, lay deeper than mere biology. This wasn't just a creature of flesh and blood. It was the physical manifestation of a story that refused to end, the undying will of a species that had once burned its own world to cinders, yet had somehow learned to rise from those ashes. The entire galaxy, in its newfound peace, was becoming a reflection of that incredible, painful journey. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, both the new Imperium and the peaceful Dominion sent their finest emissaries to the wreckage where the human had taken up residence. They hoped for answers, for guidance, for some explanation of the profound change sweeping through their civilizations. But when they arrived, the human was gone. Not vanished in a flash of violence or a hurried escape. It was simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. All that remained was a faint, lingering heat signature in the air, a ghost of warmth clinging to the cold metal corridors of the derelict ship. And upon the inner walls, a message had appeared. It wasn't written or painted. The words were burned directly into the alloy by a force they couldn't comprehend. The language was alien, ancient, yet its meaning resonated deep within the minds of all who saw it. While no one could translate it perfectly, the core message was clear and universal. Remember the fire, remember the cost, remember who you are. In that moment, as they stared at the scorched words, something inside every living mind shifted. A profound realization dawned upon them. The human had never intended to lead them, to rule them, or to become their god. It had only come to remind them of themselves, of the potential that lay dormant within them all. And once its quiet mission was complete, it had simply returned to wherever forgotten things go. Speculation became the new galactic pastime. Some said the human dissolved into pure starlight, its essence scattered among the constellations. Others believed it became part of the cosmic background radiation, its story now a constant faint whisper carried on the stellar winds for all eternity. A more philosophical school of thought claimed it was never a single being at all, but a reflection of what every thinking creature carries within itself. That small, defiant part that consistently chooses creation over destruction, life over entropy, and hope over the encroaching darkness of extinction. Centuries passed. The old rivalries of the Varine and the Terrans became footnotes in history books. The two races eventually merged, their knowledge, their bloodlines, and their histories intertwining to create a single, unified civilization. They were united not by the bloody hand of conquest, but by the gentle weight of shared memory. Their children grew up beneath skies that were no longer burned by plasma fire. Instead, they were illuminated by vast, orbital mirrors that gathered and reflected the light of 1,000 distant suns, painting the heavens in a perpetual, peaceful twilight. In their schools, they taught the history of the Great War that had once consumed the stars, and they told the story of the single, silent being that had ended it all, a being that wielded no weapon, commanded no army, and inspired no fear. It had won the war simply by showing them a reflection of themselves. They gave it many names: the Keeper of Fire, the Last Human, the First Ancestor. Though no image of it remained, every species that descended from that pivotal moment carried a spark of it within their very DNA. A tiny, luminous piece of that indomitable will to endure, to learn, and to rise beyond the base urge to destroy. And sometimes when these new generations looked up into the vast, clear night sky, they swore they could see it. A faint, shimmering outline of a figure walking peacefully across the stars, leaving subtle trails of light in its wake, as if quietly relighting the constellations one by one. And they knew, deep in their hearts, that somewhere far beyond the reach of their most powerful senses, beyond even the last dying pulse of the farthest galaxies, that figure still walked, quietly watching and patiently waiting for the day when the stars might need to remember again. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the cosmos of our imagination. We'll see you in the next one.